All right, so it's Todd Atkins, and I am here with John Perretti and Miguel Iterati. And later, Sam Bosco will be joining us as well. And we are going to talk about the contenders. Last time, John and I talked about extreme fighting, so this kind of be continuation of his creations. This one being the contenders. And before we start, I also want to thank our sponsor, which is Live to Fight Design. You can find them on Instagram at Live to Fight Design. And if you use my promo code Todd Atkins, you can get $20 off a fight banner or gym banner. And Miguel, since you're in on this interview this time, you weren't with the extreme fighting one. I kind of wanted to let you kind of start, maybe with a beginning to ask. I kind of wanted to start maybe to jump in, but I'll let you start first. Maybe I kind of wanted to maybe first start ask.
Okay.
Maybe
All right.
John,
Well,
how you originally started maybe getting the idea for this show and into putting it on, maybe where that came from.
I appreciate the offer to lead here, and it's definitely an honor to speak to John again. I watched that show on pay-per-view on the day it happened, so I watched it since periodically and stuff like that, but I was already kind of in touch with that stuff. I'd later get to work with the Abu Dhabi tournament, which is now widely known as, the biggest grappling event, mixed martial arts. And let me tell you that the Contenders was light years ahead of its time. And that's why I'm eager to do this interview and see what it is that John says about it, because I think John's a guy that, he's sometimes remembered wrongly for his strong personality too. But I think that he's a guy who's still now going to give us his opinions and tell us exactly how he got there. And when you listen to it, I think that you're going to be impressed, because the Contenders was so far ahead in the terms of matchmaking, in terms of the location of athletes, the worldwide international roster, aspects with different martial arts already beginning to show themselves. I think that's where I want to start with John. Where'd the concept come from? Because you go from Extreme Challenge, where it's. Go ahead. You take over, boss.
Extreme fighting.
Okay, extreme fighting. You go from extreme fighting to where there's basically no rules. There's little rules as possible as you had worked out. To this, which is much more technical.
Fully adopted rules.
Yes, yeah. Giving you full, I give that show credit the same way, in that it was light years ahead of its time as well. But there is a change when you're taking out striking, which is also where you come from, to do just a grappling show. How did that come about? Where did you create that?
Well, I said to Donald that I thought that we're missing something, and that we were pushed and shoved and made to be the bad show by the Ultimate, and what I wanted to do is start another sport that had a purity to it. And the idea was to invite incredible people, because at that time I had a really good reputation with fighters, because I cared about my fighters more than anything, actually. And so we decided to do a show, the greatest grappling show that no one ever saw. And I lost 200 grand that night. But my concept was to have a Siskel and Ebert kind of show, where I would basically be versus Dan Gable, and the wrestlers that watched that show sent me death threats for disagreeing with the god, Dan Gable. So it worked. But my idea was to have 6 shows, and to do some shows later throughout the United States, and to get this new idea off the ground. Abu Dhabi didn't invite me to do that. They invited Matt Hume to do that. But Abu Dhabi claims that, and I only found this out last week, but claims that, that they started this genre, and they did not. And
Well,
judging by the dates.
Yeah, what would you call it? Like submission fighting, submission wrestling? No, now they call it no-gi grappling. Which one of those appeals to you the most?
Well, we were doing submission grappling. I mean that was the coinage, and basically, we already proved that you could get knocked unconscious trying to get the straight arm bar or the go behind choke on somebody. So I proved that in extreme fighting, right? That your jujitsu doesn't always work, and and the infomercial of the Ultimate for the first 16 shows was that my little cousin in his gi could beat anybody, especially if it was a purposeful mismatch. But what I really wanted to do was get the highest level of athletes to butt heads and to see, what it was all about, because I knew what it was all about. But I wanted to tell the world what it was all about. And it was so amazing to watch. It wasn't like watching grass grow while you watch golf, and you can watch these jujitsu tournaments, and literally I could fall asleep really quickly. But you can't watch the Contenders and fall asleep.
Now, so let me ask you, let me back up a little bit of what you said there in terms of how did you make the connection with USA Wrestling to the point where, Dan Gable is like the wrestlers told you, a god. It's not like he was a B-class guy off the shelf, Dan Gable eclipses Blatnick by a lot on wrestling pedigree. You know what I mean?
Oh my
and
God!
Then, on top of that, what you were able to get in terms of the competition, we were talking about Van Arsdale before as one of the most impressive athletes across the board.
In my opinion, he's the strongest guy tendon wise that I have ever experienced, and I have fought and rolled and competed and just with everybody. Obviously, 15 to 20 past my prime, but I trained hard and I trained with everybody. And Van Arsdale, when you mentioned him before, I was like, fuck, we have nobody else to talk about now. We just fucking talked about Van Arsdale. He's at the, even in my book, he's at the top of the heap in terms of monster strength. I never felt anybody like him.
Well, now, we're going to talk about the whole card anyway.
Oh, but good.
Now let's take it to the heavyweights, because the big cat, he's a different type of athlete, God. But he might be as strong as Van Arsdale, right?
Not pound for pound.
Okay.
And not tendon wise. Now you want to talk about Erickson?
Yeah.
Because I talk about Tom Erickson all the time. So Tom Erickson, I just talked about him. I was teaching in the police academy in Fort Bend County in the sheriff's office last week. And I talked about Tom Erickson. Tom Erickson at, what did he weigh in at? 280?
Yeah.
Okay, so Tom Erickson at 280. We were working on, I was teaching him cranks, 3-finger cranks from the back. And showing him how to turn a head, and in a Lebellian fashion, and while teaching him how to do it, while he was doing it, he almost broke my fucking neck, and I know because I've had my neck broken twice. So Tom Erickson tackled me from 10.5 feet away and got me in side control. Listen, I've been a hunter my whole life, and I've seen on Kodiak Island, I've seen grizzly bears move and swat the butts of deer, right? That's what Tom Erickson did to me.
Yeah, no, that's why I was saying, look, this whole card is full of special athletes. Because what about Townsend Saunders?
Townsend Saunders was so wide, right, and so defensive. That's why I picked him for that fight. That if you laid him on his side, he was taller.
And
Now,
let's
hold
you know,
on, before we
go ahead,
continue,
go.
before we continue, we got Sam Bosco here. You know, everyone kind of knows Miguel.
About fucking time.
Yeah, Sam, I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself before we continue. Kind of introduce yourself to everybody that's watching the show here.
Sure. Thank you, Todd. As you already said, my name is Sam Bosco, and I'm friends with John, and I've known John for almost 10 years now. We've been speaking on and off, maybe 7 or 8, I'm going to say. And, you know, I also have been a lifelong martial artist, and you can see behind me, I'm actually broadcasting from my dojo gym. And I run an MMA school in Ridgecrest, California. I have active MMA fighters, and I have my grappling team is scheduled to compete in the ADCC on January 20th in Long Beach, California. So I love this stuff. And John, you know, I did some research back in the day, and all roads led back to John. And when I found that out, that's when I knew he's the guy. If there's a holy grail of information when in regards to MMA, he's the holy grail of it.
And for people watching these interviews, the reason these interviews are taking place is because of Sam. So
thank you guys
people
very
that are
much.
watching
No,
these
man, thank
videos, you have Sam to thank for this. So
Thank you.
and
I
that's
tried.
one thing I did want to ask before we continue, John. I wanted to ask you, how did you get Dan Gable to agree to do the show?
That's a Donald Zuckerman question. You got to remember we were really like diametrically different in our partnership. He was a lawyer, and he was an ex-ADA in New York. We met years and years before at a club called Zippers in New York City, where I got into a massive fight with a Hell's Angel and thought I was going to get thrown off the fucking second story of it. And so I've known Donald Zuckerman, you know, since the 70s. But I didn't know, I knew of him, but then I met him on the Upper East Side, and so on and so forth. So I don't know that answer, but we got that, and we got USA Wrestling. Well, we didn't get USA Wrestling, and then we got that guy, the fuck was his name, who I made into a commentator for that show.
Bob
Was it the
Azulis?
guy
He was
from
a
the Howard Stern
wrestler.
show?
Huh? No,
I was
no,
thinking
wrestler.
about okay.
Wrestler. No,
I
that
forgot
was-
his name, but yeah, I'm with you.
What's his name? Anyway, so you know, these guys, they didn't give a shit, you know, about anything except what they did, and it showed, you know. So
And I'd like to add something at that. Now, I've seen documentaries with Dan Gable, and he has specifically said, when I was growing up learning wrestling, he said they used to call it amateur catch as catch can. And he
Clearly.
said that's what it was always called. He said, and then people started calling it folk style because it was the folk style of wrestling. So as far as I understand, folk style is its title, but amateur catch as catch can is its name. That's the way I understand what Dan said.
he said that to me also.
Yes. He doesn't
Now,
know.
don't forget also, you know, Gene LaBelle was there, you know, and we so, you know, we had some great conversations.
Can I ask you if I can, because you would be the best positioned person on the planet to let people know the difference between a Dan Gable type of wrestler and a Gene LeBell type of wrestler, because they're very different. But I know Gene from the Cauliflower Ear Club, and his pro wrestling ties go back to guys that were very dangerous, like Lou Thesz and guys like that were absolutely legit, that you probably have had firsthand experience with. So, very different types of wrestlers, very different reputations. How would you quantify both of them?
Well, I can't comment on Dan Gable because that's not my realm of experience. But I can trust other people to comment on Dan Gable. They're not going to be politically incorrect, like commenting on Jeff Blatnick or something. So, but I can tell you the difference with LeBell. First of all, Gene was an unbelievable judo player as a middleweight. And then he won the heavyweights as a middleweight. So, I mean, he was an unbelievable judo player. So he had that as the precursor to him. And Gene, and I'm his fourth original black belt. So Gene was a gargoyle. Okay. So he had hands that were this big and they were this thick. He had size 16 triple E feet, right? And his head was, I have a pinhead, but his head was this big. And there's pictures of me with him that you can just see that, he's a gargoyle standing next to me. And, Gene then started wrestling, I should say. He started wrestling with guys who, like Carl Gotch, and he always compared me to Gotch because I cross-train. I'm a big cross-training guy. So I've been cross-training my whole life. So I was interested in all other things that Gene wasn't interested in. Gene was interested in wrestling for money and for being in the movie industry, as a stuntman, equivalent to Kirk Douglas. One of my favorite things was I was coordinating some movie. I can't remember what it was, but I got to hire Gene, which was a great thrill for me. He drove a car and crashed it or some shit. But so LeBell, the LeBellian, mystique, as a wrestler, he brought a lot to the package before he even started wrestling. Okay. He's very special in that way. Now he's comedic but when he put his hands on you, you knew it. So it took a long time for me to get respect over there.
And you say you put his hands on you too, but didn't he also have the habit of giving you like a very soft, like an extremely soft handshake when he introduced himself?
Yeah, and he would actually put a paw out. Like if he didn't like you, he put a paw out so that you had to like touch his paw, it's so, he had all kinds of sarcasms. The only thing that really should be noted is that, he didn't drink or do drugs, because God forbid he drank or did drugs. It would be bad. It would have been bad. And that's why he wouldn't train over at Bruce Lee's Kun, because they're all getting high and, doing all kinds of shit. Anyway, so I have incredible stories about that, but I think I bought him a jacket for the Contenders so that he could be there. And I'm ready.
Yeah, let's get back to the Contenders, but that was a nice side note because, like I said, the
It was a great question. It was a great question. I apologize for not having the other side of it, but
I think I'd like to share something about the other side of it for real briefly before we get back to the Contenders. Basically, I think the short answer is as to what Miguel was asking, the difference between what Gene was doing and the difference between Gable, what he was doing. I think that the real easy answer is this: one word: submissions. Gable, as an amateur wrestler, focusing on takedowns and pinning, whereas Gene was focusing on how to break you. I had Gene's book of pro wrestling finishing holds, and that is still one of the greatest books on joint locking and choke holds that I've ever seen. And it's amazing text. So to answer the question in one word: submissions.
See, and I appreciate that. Tom, I'm going to keep it here for a minute, because that, I think, is something that John can help correct about Gene LeBell and his legacy, because we got him very old in the MMA modern era. You know what I mean? And at that point, really, I think Gene didn't give a shit, to be honest with you, like what people thought of him or anything like that. Things like, you know, he put out a set of instructionals that a lot of people don't respect. And
Yes.
he also did some commentary on WFF where people said, like John said, it's important to say he didn't do drink or drugs. But that's what people said about him. He was drunk. And that's not the way he should be remembered. There's no way. That's not right at all. You know what I mean? So that's why I need John to maybe hit us with a story or two.
Man, you know, we used to go up to the cabin where he said that you know, that anyway, the mats in the cavern were all red because the blood was, you know, it didn't show very much. But I can tell you that, you know, I was put to sleep so many times in that cabin. The man was a monster. He was incredibly sadistic. And I had the utmost respect for him. You know, we had Silverado. I can't remember his. It's in my book, but I can't remember his first name. Somebody has my book right there, right? It's in the back of the book. I list it. Can you give me his name? It's pretty disrespectful, but I had 16 concussions. So
Is it in the list where you list the black belts? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's there. Well,
Dr. Alex Angor, Gene LeBell, Peter McGuire, Charles Mitrone.
No, those are my black belts.
Okay.
Anyway, his name is Silverado. He's incredibly flexible. And he was the first. And then it was my referee, who was
John Donahue.
John Donahue. And then thank you. And then came John Lewis. And then myself. Those are the original black belts from Gene LeBell. And I run into people all the time who go, "Oh, well, I got my black belt from Gene LeBell." No, you didn't.
Yeah, Bart Vale says.
No, I'm sorry. No, you did not. You know, you might have trained there. You might have had a black belt, blah, 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 but you didn't get it from him. You're not a Gene LeBell black belt.
Yeah, I know John Donahue pretty well to the point is me and him were table judges for Hoyler Gracie's first fight with Eddie Bravo. So like I know John very well, and he talks about that cabin too as a place where
that's where I met John.
Yeah, only legendary shit happened, kind of thing.
Yeah, and then there were other individuals there that came and went. You know, there was a lot of comings and goings, but the people that stuck to it is a very limited. It's 4 people. And John Donahue went on to be the Machado black belt, and John Lewis went on to be a Pederneiras black belt. And unless you believe Hicks and Gracie that everybody on my show was a purple belt, then you know the story right now. So, but you know, I have such a plethora of stories, you know, running around in my head, and I don't really know which way you want me to go with them. But the man was just unbelievable. He was and he was powerful. He was so powerful. His calves were bigger than my thighs. I mean, he was a gargoyle. He was Russian, by the way, a Russian Jew, and he didn't know that. He called me up one day about probably 2 or 3 years before he died and said, "I found out I'm a Russian Jew. I didn't know." And he was a monster, man. He was a monster. And his attitude was just, it was unbelievable. The first time I can tell you a story that no one knows. The first time that I found out, I think I got his number from Benny Urquidez, and I called him up and he answered the phone, and we talked for like 4 hours. And I remember I was in Hampton Bays, New York, and he basically invited me to come to California, and the next day I got on a plane.
Now, Todd, I'll give you a chance if you want to take it back to the Contenders and get back on track. If not, I could go off on a segue here if you want.
What I really want to do is I wanted to kind of throw it to Sam, because I know I had talked to John about this offline, but really what I was talking to Sam about this last night, and Sam was the one who brought this up, was Gable's kind of epiphanies that he was having during this event. So I want Sam to kind of talk about this. So Sam, I want to kind of let you take it away on this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoy watching the Contenders so much that I watch it on average once or twice a year. And I've been doing that fairly regularly because it's a 3-hour show on YouTube. So there's enough information there, like any 3-hour movie. Every time you watch it, you see at least 1 or 2 new things that you missed the previous viewings. So in any case, as Todd was mentioning, throughout the show, you see consistently Dan Gable is having, and Todd used the exact word, epiphanies. And this is some of the first time Dan Gable has ever seen real grappling and real jiu-jitsu. Guys like Frank Shamrock, guys like Matt Hume. Dan was completely ignorant of the subject of submissions and what ground fighting looked like that wasn't wrestling. So throughout the entire show, from beginning to end, Dan is literally having these epiphanies. And let me give you an example. He was watching one of the matches and he says, "You know something I noticed? This is a much closer type of wrestling than the wrestling we do." And I thought, that's very important to note. That's a very important note. And if I was there, I would say, Dan, that's because where your wrestling ends at the pin, grappling starts. Because once you got that guy in side control, you still got to submit him. You still got to tap him. So I need to use the wrestling skills to get to side control. And then I need to use my breaking skills and my choking skills to finish the match. So Dan said, "Oh, it's a much closer style of wrestling." No, Dan, it ain't closer. You just never seen side control utilized like that before, because that's a pin in your art. Throughout the show, he's constantly seeing things. Let me give you another example. He said, in one time, I actually took a notebook and I wrote down and I made notes of everything he was saying, because I'm studying this stuff intellectually as well. And another thing he said, the guys keep backing up. They won't allow the takedown war to happen because one guy's backing up, and you can't wrestle with the guy who's moving backwards. He's got to be moving towards you, pushing into you in order to hit your double leg, in order to shoot, in order to clinch with the guy. And so, in other words, let me reverse engineer what he said. If you want to cancel wrestling, move backwards. It's striking backwards as you move to cancel wrestling. All these things Dan was noticing because he was having these epiphanies because he'd never seen fighters before that could grapple. I hope
And
that
can
answers.
let me just interrupt you because it's such a great point. I was never a very aggressive fighter. I was always a passive aggressive fighter, and I did all my road work backwards because I wanted to be more comfortable going backwards, so I could use my world-class right leg, and be able to counterpunch. So I grappled like that too. But the wrestlers, the reason that I was so enamored with these wrestlers from an early age, was that they train harder than anyone else. And they only go fourth gear forward. Period. Everything they do is fourth gear forward. So those guys are racing to get to each other. So every time I fought with those guys, wrestled with them, trained with them, but we were fighting, I was in fourth gear reverse and fought out of my guard.
Yes, absolutely.
And
John.
You missed it. I'm sorry, you missed it. But maybe these guys want to paraphrase what I said about Tom Erickson off air. What he did to me.
And
Tom
wrestlers
sprung at him from about 3 meters away, 10 feet, and just took him down kind of like a bear pawing with a deer in the woods, And we were just talking about the impressiveness of the athletes. John, that was the point, right? That was the one you wanted
to make? Absolutely. Into side control from 10.5 feet away.
Yes.
He disappeared and reappeared inside control like a grizzly bear.
Yeah, the match that you're referring to was Pedner Saunders. So John asked Dan, why isn't this great takedown guy taking Pedner's down as the match was starting to end? Because I watched it last night in full, so I have it all here. And Dan said, because the guy's backing up, like we're always pushing into each other. That's how we get our takedowns, by countering the aggression or whatever. And he's backing up, so Saunders isn't shooting on. So he was like having this kind of, this new information as it was happening.
Yes, and it's
so funny.
Because
he's not pushing into him, no takedown is happening.
That's exactly right. Those wrestlers are often used to 3 2-minute periods. So they've got 6 minutes to go totally nuts. If you can survive for 6 minutes, your odds are much greater of living through those. If you can survive for 6, you're more likely to win at the 7, 8, and 9 minute mark. Okay,
but you guys are missing something here, and it's because of the intimacy I have with those guys. Townsend Saunders had an unprecedented record in all his years of competing that no one ever took him down. Pederneiras primarily fought to the mount, and he was so wily and so amazing. So when my idea was to put those two together, so the non-aggressive aspect of Townsend Saunders and the aggressive aspect of Pederneiras taking people down was nullified.
I like that.
A lot of thought went into these fucking matches. I promise you.
I'm drinking it all up. I appreciate the insight. What it brings me to another point I wanted to ask somebody like you. Coleman came onto the scene, and the thing about Coleman was a guy that he'd fight in a bar. Now you get to Erickson. Erickson wasn't necessarily the kind of guy who would be fighting in bars. Townsend Saunders, almost certainly not. Now, there is an aspect, and they weren't as successful as Coleman in MMA. Part of that is blamed on mindset. How do you analyze that? Are there guys that are made more for, including the fist and others, or how would you quantify that that element?
I listen, let's talk about the big guy. I wanted to match him so badly because I thought he had outstanding potential. That's why I was teaching him cranks from the back where he almost broke my neck. I wanted to match Erickson versus Higan Machado. But I couldn't get the fucking Machados to come to the fucking table for anything because they kicked me out of their school because I started this sport, extreme fighting, where you could get knocked out trying to get the straight armbar or the go behind choke. You know this story.
Yeah.
Did you know that he's a Basque?
Who?
Did you know
Erickson?
that? No, him.
You?
No,
Me. I'm a
Did you
bastard.
know? Did you know that?
Now, I don't mean to toot my own horn, but did you know I'm a Basque?
No,
Yeah, look at my last name, man. Iturrate.
I did not know that. And you know what? I bring it up because
But I appreciate it.
there's a superior bloodline there that I can talk about for hours. But what I'm trying to say here is that there are people that I had, all these dream matches in my head with, and I couldn't get them to come to the table, mostly because they had a reputation that had to be protected. And Todd and I fucking yacked on that off air a bunch last week or the week before or whenever the fuck that was.
You know, I saw Regan Machado's last matches at Abu Dhabi and
Keegan.
And I could tell you that he was a shadow of his former self at the end.
How do you know what his former self was? I mean, I gave him his first exhibition, grappling exhibition at Oishi Judo in New York City. I flew him in and took care of him and stuff. He was a behemoth, but who'd he fight?
His loss came to John Olavinmo, who was a
what I'm
Norwegian
saying,
guy.
What I'm saying is, in terms of his reputation, who'd he fight?
I think it was his matches with Hickson that probably gave him but I hadn't seen those at the time in the 90s. So I mean, I'm just speaking as with some other perspective. But the Machado, you're right about their reputation. This is what I was going to say about Erickson, where I'm more in my wheelhouse, is what was notable to me was I asked the same question of Kerr and Coleman. Who would you not want to fight? And they both said Erickson. So there was something about Erickson that even the other elite guys saw as like a lot, like the respect they had for
nobody wanted to fight Tom. Nobody. I couldn't get a fight for Tom.
Yeah.
Not for not trying. I'm telling you, I tried to get a fight for Tom. I asked all these Brazilian sycophants, and I couldn't get a fight for Tom. I mean, the guy was a behemoth, and they were, they were frightened.
Now we're talking about the athleticism of the wrestlers. Let's pause for a moment here and talk about like Hume and Shamrock, who were more of the grappler guys, but also like Hume is one of the most precise things I've ever seen move. You know what I mean? And
oh my God, you have no idea what it's like being in his clutches, because he's got so much extra pressure on you because he's so strong, but he's thinking 3 moves ahead. I mean, if you want to just look at a fight that should have been rematched, just look at Paulson Hume. Oh my God, what a fight. What a great, I mean, if I didn't make the match, it doesn't matter who made it. It's so fucking great. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, no, that was light years ahead of its time. There's no other word for it. Kudos to Paulson and Hume. What about Frank? What about Frank? Frank to me, I quantify more as like a natural athlete, because I don't know that he had he was more of a street kid kind of thing and came to the martial arts a little bit later. How would you qualify where his talent came from?
No, Frank was the best cross trainer. Frank was the Carl Gotch of the mixed martial arts. And don't forget, that was the middleweight division, was the most fucking scary fucking division that you could be in. So scary that boss didn't even want to be in it. But to stick with the contenders, well, you have the matches in front of you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's let the two Basques battle it out over there.
I'm in my head.
I'll answer questions.
Okay, take it away, Sam, because I'll look up the lineup and we'll start in on fight by fight here in a minute.
Okay, I'd like to add, the first thing I want to add when I think about the contenders is the score. The final score at the end of the night.
I thought you meant the musical score.
The final score
which I'm responsible for.
was
Simply-
4-3.
Simply the best.
Simply,
in the
no,
tournament?
not the musical score.
Simply the best.
Right, the very 90s.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're talking about 4-3. 4 wins for the martial artists and 3 wins for the wrestlers. So the simple answer is the martial artist won that night. Now, John also used to tell me about that some of the wrestlers were so pissed off at what was happening. One guy was throwing chairs through walls or destroying property. Is that right,
Yes,
John?
absolutely. The little guy, Hall, Dennis.
I
what's his name? Dennis Hall?
I thought that match could have been argued.
Hey,
that
listen,
was
I
an
think all
interesting
matches can be argued.
No,
That's
that match
why-
was interesting. That was an interesting match.
That match could have been argued. All matches could be argued. The reason I didn't have fucking judges in extreme fighting was to not have that kind of a problem. But in this kind of a sport, I thought I needed judges. But yeah, he destroyed property and was psychotic and duly upset. And you could look at it as you just watched it, Todd. What do you think?
Well, I thought Hawk did the best of the Brazilians, in my opinion. Initially, he really attacked him really quickly. Like he went to his arm real fast, then he hip bump sweeped him right into the mount. Like Hawk was real aggressive with his technique. And then Hall kind of wore him down as the match went on. He's pinning him in the fence. Hawk couldn't really have the same kind of success as the match went on. But initially, he looked really good. So.
Additionally, I'd like to add, I believe that the judges were predominantly wrestlers. Is that right, John?
Yes, it was.
And it seemed like pretty clear to me that unless the fights had been decided with a submission, the wrestlers, the wrestling judges lean towards to voting for the wrestlers. But yeah, they
I always liked
Listen.
John Hawk because you saw him everywhere. You saw him in the UFC, saw him in Shuto, saw him in all these shows. He was
Because he was good.
Yeah, I was
he
going to say,
competed against everybody.
shelf.
Fucker so good.
Yeah.
and even now, when people remember, there's so many, he's a top shelf guy from that era, probably second to Hoyler Gracie for the lower weight class. They were in different weight classes, but
and maybe better.
I had a lot of respect for him. That's what I'm saying. The match was very interesting because you had this guy who was, he was very talented, and then Hall was friggin' tough, man.
So aggressive.
It was very interesting. The match, the two combatants.
Let me tell you about a match that never happened. Igor Zinoviev was hurt. He was always injured. He was injured half the year, always every year. But Zinoviev couldn't be in that show.
who was his opponent?
So who was his opponent? Now you're looking at the middleweights, right? You got the card in front of you, right?
Mhm.
There would have been Frank.
Were you going to do Zinoviev against Kenny Monday?
No,
Okay.
he wasn't big enough.
Or Henderson?
Kenny wasn't big enough. Huh?
Was it Henderson?
Henderson. Yeah. So Zinoviev, Henderson. Think about it.
Yeah, that's maybe the two toughest guys ever.
The two toughest guys ever. That's exactly right.
And
It's
John,
unbelievable.
what about did you ever consider putting Conan Silveira against Tom Erickson that day? Okay.
Yeah, I there's levels to this game. Before we get back into this one, John, you mentioned that the Contenders was supposed to be, if it worked out, a series. What was some of the other stuff you had planned for the second show?
Oh, I don't work like that. I'm a pyramidal matchmaker. So we needed to know who was going to win these fights before I would even consider that kind of thing.
Okay. Now there were some guys though that you could consider your guys that, or guys that you brought up that you already had access to that you had to be thinking about for this show though. Like, you know.
Oh yeah. You know, like I always wanted Miletich, you know, for the next show, because first of all, he knew how to wrestle. And he was involved with wrestlers, but I'm not sure that he would even have taken a thing. I'd have to put him up against, you know, I could put him up against jiu-jitsu guys all day long, even though he had a Brazilian jiu-jitsu tattoo. But I love Pat, man. And Pat, you got to understand, is also a lot bigger than you think he is. Like, it wasn't on the show, so I mean, I could expound on Pat for a lot. I can expound on a lot of this shit because it's all personal knowledge, you know.
Yeah.
Unlike people who aren't there, have no personal knowledge of what the fuck they're talking about. So I'll answer questions. Go ahead.
All right, so let's get back into the lineup. What was the opening fight? How did you pick the order of the fights, John? Because
Sam knows better than I do.
Opening fight, Tom Erickson versus TK, Tsuyoshi Kosaka.
Think about that. What a fucking card.
Yeah, no, at least you found a fight for Erickson here, and Kosaka was, you know, the real deal. You would use Kosaka too for Boss Rutan's MMA debut or UFC debut back then. So,
because he was a better guy on the ground than Boss, much better, and just so much better. You know, people used to say about Boss, because I could talk about Boss all day long too, but the Boss has gotten very forgetful. I must say. And if he was on this show right now, I would tell him that he has selective amnesia about the Boss Rutan Invitational, which was my idea, Boss, not yours. We just going to use your name because the UFC wouldn't allow me to have my own promotion. But anyway, so Boss was, the Brazilians used to say, well, you know, he's not very good on the ground. And then I said, but everybody he's ever fought ends up on the ground. And they're all unconscious. So he must be pretty good on the ground since all fights end on the ground. But Kosaka was he was phenomenal. I mean, in the clutch, in that moment where striking stops and grappling starts in the clutch. He was so dominant.
Yeah, and TK was using techniques that you didn't see become popular till a decade later when Eddie Bravo started saying, "Oh, you know, we're doing lockdown over here." Well, TK's been doing that for 10 years.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And again, you know, touching those guys, you know, rolling around those fucking guys, you know, they're just amazing. You know, it's like I used to go rock climbing with Sakuraba. You know, he was so fucking strong. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, I would say a lot. That's why some of the Japanese were successful for as long as they were, because they were a little bit farther along in MMA kind of skills for a long time. And then as people started to catch up to them, you know, even though they were undersized, they were more experienced in MMA. I would say overall, like being well rounded and their technique together. That's why they were
Yeah.
successful for a long time. But as people caught up, now they're not.
And work ethic.
Yeah, yeah.
Huge work ethic. And you know, I lived in Japan, so
Yeah.
I mean, I really understand. I understand that.
Do you think that in many ways pro wrestling, both with Gene LeBell, Lucy's, Carl Gotch that we mentioned, also in Japan had kind of guardians of the knowledge of real fighting? Because Japan also had the whole Fujiwara, you know, the Takada, who really didn't amount to much of an MMA fighter, but Sakuraba came from there, and those guys trace their roots back to the 80s, and some of the pro wrestling, you know, hard style that they used to do was also kind of a secret way of guarding that old knowledge. Do you see it that way?
Well, I used to rock climb with him too. But no, I can't comment on wrestling because I don't have a lot of respect for it. And I don't like works, which is common knowledge, obviously. But so I can't comment on that. But I can tell you that that whole early judo thing can change the structure of a man. And Zinoviev is a perfect example of that. You know, they're just more grounded, and they're wirier, and they're strong over a greater level of flexibility, kind of like a swimmer, right? Who can use his flexibility, or an Olympic lifter who can use his flexibility and speed. So those guys, those Japanese bow-legged guys, are super strong. My father always used to say, "Watch out for those bow-legged guys because they're fucking strong. So you're gonna fight this guy. Be careful because you know his legs are strong." And my father used to say that shit all the time. Bow-legged guys. It's true. You're laughing, Sam.
So now to get back on track, so you had Dan Anderson against Zinoviev. Zinoviev gets hurt, and you replace Zinoviev with Frank Shamrock. And then
Yes,
also
sir.
as an asterisk for the future, you had Frank and Zinoviev fight for the UFC title. So
Well, you
can
had to
see-
fucking do that. You
you
had
can
to
see
do
the
that.
mind of Perretti working here. There's legitimate.
You know how fucking hard it was to get fucking what's his name to even consider putting somebody, consider to put like Frank at risk against Zinoviev, who came in injured again. But I mean, that's how great Frank was. I mean, you got to understand that. You know, you're talking about, in my opinion, the hierarchy is all bird's eye from Frank Shamrock down. I mean, I don't want to be disrespectful, but you know, his brother was absolutely nothing compared to Frank. Wasn't even in the same category. The only thing that happened was that there was a great hype that came out of the UFC.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, I thought you might you rate Frank above Boss.
Absolutely. Boss had better some things. Frank had everything. Yes, I talked. Wait a second. Todd, didn't we speak about this?
You ranked Maurice above Frank, though. I told you Frank was the first greatest fighter ever that we saw.
No, I didn't rank Maurice. I said that you've forgotten about Maurice Smith.
Yeah, you're right.
As an athlete.
I said Frank was the first greatest fighter ever that we saw, and you kind of said, well, you told me that I forgot about Maurice.
Yes, but what I'm trying to say here is that Frank was the top of the heap. Now, Frank did not have certain skills of certain other individuals, right?
Yeah.
Frank couldn't sweep like Zinoviev. Frank didn't have the big right hand that Zinoviev had. Frank did not have the legs of Bas Rutten, but Frank was better than them.
Mhm.
Okay. So now, how do you get Frank for the Contenders? Just replace Zinoviev? Call him up on the phone?
Hey, Frank, I got a match for you. And Frank always said, listen, if he had a match for me, it's going to be tough. Because there was no bullshit in the matches. Yeah. Remember that? It's not like, what the fuck was his name from the UFC that we got rid of?
Joe,
You mentioned his name before. No,
Art Davie?
Art Davies. It's not like, well, how big are you? 285. You're in.
Yeah.
Who'd you fight? You're in. No.
Yeah, no,
Not like that with me. Sam, do you agree with that or not?
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? It's still like that today. You get pro wrestlers showing up to UFC saying, and suddenly they're fighting guys for either the belt or a couple steps below. It's John says it best. It's not a sport. It's a spectacle.
Yeah. Which was not my conception for either of these two sports.
So heading in, you got Frank against Henderson. Dan wore shoes. I think I remember that, right? Did he wear shoes?
Damn right. Why would I ever take shoes away from wrestlers who've been wearing them since they're 3 years old?
Well, do you also get the feeling that he was like painfully unaware of what that could mean as well? Like what the repercussions of wearing shoes are now that we know, you know?
You're talking about handles?
Yeah, and I know you knew he was in trouble. Come on, John.
I didn't know he was in trouble. And again, in extreme fighting, you can wear shoes. Wrestlers can wear shoes. You choose to wear shoes, you can wear shoes. You've been using shoes your whole life. Can we wear shoes? Absolutely, you can wear shoes. Now, me personally, I like legs, ankles, and knees. So those handles are really important to me. But, I wasn't Mike Van Arsdale, and, you could twist on that fucking ankle all day long and it ain't gonna move. Or John Lober, who actually got his fucking, while I was ringside, got his tibia and his fibula broken, his foot on backwards, and he wanted to keep fighting. I took him to the hospital in Japan.
That's a famous pancrase moment. Yeah, that the Japanese fighter, his opponent, was more surprised and alarmed than John was.
He was mortified.
Yeah, that's unbelievable video.
And you can see me jump in the ring because no one knows what the fuck to do.
It's unbelievable. So,
and let's not take anything away from John Lober as a fighter. Oh my God, he's in the top 5. He's right there. It can go any way. Zinoviev said he was the strongest guy ever.
He picked him up like over his head, and yeah.
No, he didn't just. Well, he had a broken collarbone going in Zinoviev again, but he didn't just pick him up. He good morninged him, and quite frankly, I know what good mornings are, and because I do them in the gym, and for someone to have Zinoviev hanging on their fucking head in a front neck lock, and for you to be able to pick him up. And I've had Zinoviev on my fucking neck for 10 years prior to this stuff. So that's an unprecedented movement. I've never seen anything like it before, since, after. It just doesn't matter. Lober did something that was super fucking human.
Yeah. Now, how do you quantify a guy like, where does a guy like Lober come from in terms of martial arts background? Does he have that? Like, would you compare him to Tank? Like, is he a street fighter with the mentality? Like, what? How would you?
No.
Tell us about him. Tell us.
Well, much better at jiu-jitsu. He had a really good teacher. What the fuck was that guy's name? He was like a 2nd or 3rd degree black belt in jiu-jitsu. Somebody help me.
Okay.
In California, in Huntington Beach. Come on. White guy, looked like nothing, looked like a gas station attendant, really talented.
Chris Brennan?
No, don't say, I'm not criticizing Chris Brennan. He fucking criticized me recently, and I wrote him an apology because I don't remember the story the way he does.
I'll look it
no,
up.
he's so,
Keep going.
please look it up because I'm forgetting this guy's name, and he was very talented and he was John's jiu-jitsu guy for forever.
Not Red Herd.
No, if you mention the name, I'll recognize it. But anyway, so Lober was a monster. I think he was like deadlifting like 800 pounds. He was, he was eloquently jacked. He was a monster, and he was, John. I know John really, really well. I haven't heard from him in about 3 years, but I know John really well, and John was psychotic.
He beat Frank Shamrock in Hawaii the first time they fought, remember?
And that's what I said, that top 5 thing could go either way anytime. You don't know what's going to happen. Like everyone always says, 9 times out of 10, Zenobia beats Shamrock. But 1 out of 1, Shamrock beats Zenobia.
Now, this might be a good spot for me to recycle that mentality question. Because you think Frank, because of Pancrase and stuff like that, coming over to close fist and meeting a guy like Lober who was really suited for that, was he short here the first time? Like not quite knowing what he's getting into, sort of like, like where Kurt didn't like it the way Coleman liked it. You know what I mean? It's like, was that important for Frank to come along mentally?
I can't answer that. That's a Frank Shamrock question. I have no fucking idea what's in his head.
Okay, that's fair. I appreciate that.
I love Frank. I mean.
Yes, we're talking about legends, and I feel like I'm asking a legend about legends, so that's why.
Well,
I'm tossing out a lot of questions.
That's speculative there.
Well, in my book,
you're pushing it a little there.
Now, what about the third match is Saunders and Pedinaris, and we talked a little bit about this, but again, why don't you talk about
Townsend Saunders, the way I remember it, had never been taken down in his whole collegiate blah blah blah, and Pedinaris was a really aggressive, takedown kind of guy, and but also had a terrific guard, was a great teacher. He was a corner man with me for John Lewis against that little scrawny guy, and John. That was a fun night. But anyway, I rode off on my horse called Tangent.
That's okay. But yeah, Pedinaris is another legend, like you said. Students, later years, the whole Renan Barao rather, and I think Renato Verissimo was also his student. But Renan Barao, Jose Aldo, I actually got to matchmake Shaolin's first MMA fight, Shaolin Vitor Ribeiro. So he's one of those legends and stalwarts, and you were one of the last people where we got to see him compete. He also knocked the fuck out of Ruben Asado.
That was who I was thinking of. John Lewis versus Ruben Asado. Thank you.
Okay. So now Pedinaris and Saunders, again, matchmaking light years ahead of its time. Lower weight classes with where it's not just important to fill the card, but also taking the time and detail to go out and get the top guys. Because Pedinaris, like you said, is a teacher too, has defined himself. You can still see him on pay-per-view, cornering people. John Hawk was also from that group. But the next match is Verissimo and Van Arsdale. And this is one where the wrestlers won mainly because of that X factor. They bring that athleticism that's just beyond. Here's another chance to talk about Mike.
Yeah, but see, Verissimo's very defensive submission guy who could fucking he could twist you and you didn't know it was gonna happen. So he had a great chance to beat Van Arsdale. But he had never touched a Van Arsdale before. I'm being redundant, but I think that's a great match. And I think if it happened again, it would have went very differently, because once you touch him, you know that you can't go head to head with this clown. He's just going to be, he's just, he's a fucking octopus.
Yeah. Yeah, long and flexible, like you mentioned. And Verissimo also, was there an aspect of like more mature athlete versus a young athlete coming out? Because Verissimo was still a baby at that point.
Yeah, but he was so talented. He worked so many people. I saw him, beat guys who were stronger and bigger and equally fast. He was incredibly talented. He was, it would be interesting to see, which I wanted to do a lot, but it would have been interesting to see, just how good some of these famous jiu-jitsu guys were up against the cream of the crop. I mean, can you imagine how Mario Sperry would have worked Royce Gracie?
Yeah.
Come on.
It was interesting to see him that early, like in the Contenders, to see Hanato there, because you would see him later on in the UFC, and he competed in BJ shows like Rumble on the Rock, but you had already had him in the Contenders that early.
Because those guys sparkle, man. I mean, it's like walking down the beach in Sao Paulo and going, "Who the fuck is that?" Right? And and running into the axe murderer.
Well,
Sam, it's been a while since let Sam say something, because it's been a while since you said anything, Sam.
Well, I would like to add that I did briefly speak with Matt Hume today via Facebook Messenger, and I did clarify from him, and I do have his message screenshotted that I already sent to John. And Matt Hume specifically said that John's show, The Contenders, was before the ADCC. So this isn't just John's word saying he was the first grappling show, submission show. This isn't just my word saying this. Matt Hume, like I said, I just spoke with him this morning and he confirmed it. And I sent the screenshot to John and said, hey, and what he said was Sheik Talhoun watched The Contenders. And after he watched it, he calls up Matt Hume and said, hey, for whatever, I don't know why he didn't choose John, but he calls up Matt Hume and says, hey, Matt, come on down to Saudi Arabia and teach me about this fighting style. And I want to set up a show and I want you to train me. And then the Sheik put on the first Abu Dhabi in the year 1998. So I wanted to make sure that I said that. And I didn't forget to mention that I have verified this information from Matt Hume personally.
Well, you look at the calendars, and there's no denying the facts. John mentioned, unfortunately, the Contenders is kind of wasn't seen enough and isn't remembered enough, but that it was a predecessor and every bit at the. It's interesting, Sheik Talhoun, in the very first tournament, and John as a matchmaker seems to like want to test his friends and really know what's going on there. Talhoun worked the tournament so that Matt Hume would meet Renzo Gracie in the final. It didn't happen because of an injury, but you got to be impressed by that, a little bit of the matchmaking there, John, don't you think?
I don't know. I didn't watch it. The point I'm trying to make, though, and that what Sam is getting at, is that it's in direct contradiction to what the motherfucker says in print. Is that not right, Sam?
Okay, let me put it like this. The ADCC website, I sent John a screenshot of the ADCC website, and it uses the following terms, and I quote, Sheikh Talhoun has created a new modality. I wasn't sure what the word modality looked up, so I looked it up, and it specifically said modality is a synonym for the word style. The ADCC on their own website under the history section, when you click the tab, it pulls up and it says there about halfway down that Sheikh Talhoun created a new modality of submission fighting. And I thought, I feel as if they're only saying that to take advantage of the fact that everybody knows nobody saw the Contenders.
Yeah,
so you
it's
can
just wrong.
Yeah, so you can say stuff and nobody's really going to fact check you, but I am because I follow John. And like I said, throughout the decades of my life that I've been studying martial arts, and I study this on striking and grappling, all roads somehow end up leading back to John Perretti.
Raphael
That's why I
probably wrote that.
Yeah, and that's why I wrote an article about John. See, I tried to reach out to John a few times and I didn't get a response. And then I wrote an article about Dan Gable and John in the show, The Contenders. And then John read that article and we started talking after that. So, you know, it isn't the first time that somebody has tried to take credit for John's work. It's not the first time.
I think Pat Miletich talks about that a lot, you know, with the coinage of mixed martial arts. You know, a lot of people want to take credit for it, but it was actually me.
Yeah.
So, and you know, there's this amazing amount of disinformation surrounding, you know, this amnesiac, you know, philosophy. And, you know, you know, Donald Zuckerman said once, he goes, where's the threat, you know, for giving you credit for what you did? Where's the threat? Why do they keep, every time you do an interview, why does it get taken down? Why have you disappeared? You know, why am I being airbrushed out of the photographs from the UFC? What's the threat? Well, the threat is that, you know, you're dealing with a bunch of egomaniacs that they want to take credit for everything, you know. But if you go with the idea that it occurred before and existed or pre-existed, like the Contenders and ADCC, and then you have a basis to understand it. But no one cares because they all believe in this incredible mythology that is, in fact, untrue.
Yes, and I'd like to also add that that's true across the board as well. And what I mean by that is if you stop your average guy, if you're at a bar and you stop your average guy and you're talking about mixed martial art, this average guy is going to bring up the day that Hoist Gracie saved the world from ignorance.
Yeah.
You're going to hear a Gracie-centric narrative of the mixed martial arts. And I say, who's John Perretti? Oh, I don't know. I don't know who John is. And I flat out tell them that I don't feel that, I think they're misinformed and I don't know what they're talking about. But this has been par for the course I've seen, where John not getting the credit for his creations, his sports. And that's what I feel like I'm one of the few guys that are going to speak up for John on his behalf. That's because I've only been after one thing: to be a martial artist seeking truths about martial arts. And I keep running into this guy named John and then that's when I start studying more and realize, oh, wow, he put together the first real MMA show. Wow, he was the early matchmaker for the UFC. He was the guy running grappling shows before Sheikh Talhoun knew anything about it. But you don't see any of this on the ADC website under the history section. Not a word.
Yeah, I mean,
You know, and that it's, you know, it's there's all kinds of reasons why, I don't do interviews. And one is that not a lot of people ask me to do interviews, because can you imagine, if, I was there the day that Joe Rogan got hired as a backstage comedian. The effect that it would have would be like, a UFO landing on the White House lawn. It would change the narrative.
Yeah.
And if you change the narrative to such an extent, you disembody this whole genre, and they just can't allow it to happen.
Yeah, I think that's the threat that you present, is that they're never going to be able to control your narrative. Like what you say, like, for example, like, let's go back 10 years and say, John, what do you, and I know you probably don't follow the sport like, like a fan, right? But like, what do you think about this whole rise of Conor McGregor into title shots that he doesn't deserve and this whole thing? And I get the feeling that it wouldn't have happened under your watch. You know what I mean? It's just a total different style of looking at the sport. And that's what they can't control. That you would be like, yeah, this Conor McGregor hasn't paid his due. Yeah, I don't know what you would say, but they're afraid.
I would say I never saw him fight.
Yeah, see, but I think that they're afraid of the strength of your philosophy for this sport.
And Miguel,
it does go back 3 decades more than most people.
Miguel, I'd like to add something else. I just typed in a Wikipedia search the word "the Contenders."
Yeah.
The Contenders, John's show is not even on Wikipedia. And if you type in John Perretti, which I've done several times on Wikipedia, it doesn't mention the guy we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
So
no, it got erased.
Wow.
I think you can make one though. If you want.
and I've started that.
Yeah.
I've started the process.
But there's no, my name is no longer italicized, or what is it called? I'm sorry, I'm so old. It's not highlighted, or what is it?
Link. There's no link.
There's no link. It's gone. They took the link away.
Yeah. And the Contenders, it's an empty spot. And I started building, I'm already contacted Wikipedia, and I've started creating the Contenders information on Wikipedia, because right now it doesn't exist.
Yeah,
Nor do I.
That's not right. Yeah, and you're right, because the Contenders, and then Dana White's Contender series is what you did find.
Oh,
oddly enough,
where did they get that name from?
So yeah, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable, and it really just isn't right. So before we get too far into the segue, let's get into the next match here. So
yes,
at this point we had Hawk and Dennis Hall, and then Carlos Newton and Chris Barnes. And Newton, another stalwart of John Perretti's early roster, another special athlete.
That was a sensational match too. I thought Barnes really took it to Newton, and then Newton ended it right near the end.
What could you ask for anything else?
Yeah, I mean, it was, and Barnes, I don't know what he did after that, but dang, I wanted to see more of him in something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Can you imagine if there was a second show? That's a rematch too.
I was like, why did this guy not do more stuff?
Man, that's a fucking great. I can still see that match. What did you describe that match, Todd? You saw it last night.
Yeah, I mean, Newton, as great as he is, Barnes probably didn't know a lot of jiu-jitsu, I would assume. But I mean, he was just taking it to Newton as far as physicality and, takedowns and just being really physical. And yeah, he was just manhandling Newton. I knew Newton was probably letting it, I think he was trying to catch him on the way down, so he was maybe not resisting the takedown as much as he could, maybe, but he was getting worked by Barnes.
Newton was so powerful. Newton was he was so slinky and powerful. I mean, he was like he really brought a whole different, puzzle to it. I used him in Extreme Fighting too because I didn't have anybody because everybody got stolen and shipped off. But Newton was amazing, and I used him a lot because Newton did some amazing stuff. I used him in the UFC. The greatest reversal in the history of mixed martial arts, including the UFC, is Carlos Newton and Dan Henderson in the air, a reversal in the air. And I remember sitting next to Boston going, "You ever see that before?" He's like, "No, never." I said, "Me neither." Just like that, together, like sitting next to each other going, "Wait, have you ever seen that before?"
Wow. Mm-hmm.
No, never. Me neither.
Yeah,
We were
Newton,
like, we were in awe.
Newton is so unique. He's just incredible.
That's a good word.
Yeah.
That's a good word.
Even this,
Yeah.
even this lawsuit I was talking to you about the other day, that we interviewed the lawyer, and who actually Carlos Newton called him out of the blue, and he came to his house in Arizona, and he basically he didn't even tell him what he was doing. He just, he came to his office or whatever, his law office, and he sat down and he started typing up the
Yeah,
this,
let me
this
let me give John a little bit
Yeah,
more detail.
trying to tell him how the
there's a real sharp lawyer that trained in California that started going to the UFC, started realizing the pay wasn't right, and he's the head of a 1,200 fighter lawsuit, a class
What's the
action
name
lawsuit.
of, what's his name?
Bob Macy.
yeah, Bob Macy.
So he's that lawsuit comes to
Is he from
court.
California?
I
Yeah, he
don't know
trained
if
at Eddie Bravo's place. Yeah.
yeah, he lives there now. He went to Cornell University. So maybe I don't know where he's from originally, but the bottom line is he was starting to catch on that the UFC was making a lot more money than they were letting on, and by just analyzing what was going on in the business. And he started writing articles. And one of them was like, these guys are wide open, to the point where a law professor actually told him, why haven't you filed a lawsuit yet? And he's like, I don't have a plaintiff. Well, plaintiff number one is Carlos Newton. Newton read his articles, and to the point of to props, the guy was cerebral on top of everything else that you're talking about. Newton said to him at the end of the conversation, he said, I know you're a real estate lawyer, but you're going to file this class action lawsuit because I know that you figured this shit out. So Newton is actually the guy that is spearheaded, or was at the very beginning, and I don't think that surprises you, right?
I don't put anything past Carlos Newton. I just think he's got the heart of a lion, and he was always such a stand-up guy, in a business where a lot of people are not stand-up guys.
But the lawyer's not the one who typed up this lawsuit. Carlos is the one who typed it up.
See,
he was there for like a week doing all this stuff. The lawyer had no idea what he was doing. Carlos did all this stuff and said, "Here you go. You're filing this."
Yeah, what a stand-up guy.
Crazy. And now this is going to go, if the UFC doesn't settle, this is going to go to court in like March or April. And this all started with Carlos.
If you have more money than the gods, then you'll settle.
Yeah, but it all started with Carlos, and
I totally buy it.
And it started.
I totally buy it.
And
what was the next match?
Next match was
and the final match was Hugh versus Kenny Monday.
Was that the last match, Hugh Monday?
Yes.
Okay.
And I believe Monday is the only gold medalist on this show. I think Townsend Saunders was a silver medalist. So Monday is another one of those wrestlers with pedigree.
Hang on. So Monday is a two-time gold medalist, one-time silver medalist. I recall. And Monday is got the worth ethic of, you know, of a lion. And Monday was a very stoic guy. And Monday knew how to do everything. And, you know, and Monday was very hard to match. And John Lewis stepped up to match against Monday. And that didn't go well. And rolling with Monday was just, it was, I mean, he was amazing. And in his sport, he was unprecedented. That's how fucking good Kenny Monday was.
I'd like to
I probably would have used Kenny Monday, you know, again and again and again. That's how fucking good he was.
And I would like to add a really important concept that I saw with the Contenders was that all of the wrestlers were so far removed from the submission game that they wouldn't know what a submission was if one was shown right in front of them. Their mind was so far removed from the submission game. And I think that's because none of them actually knew the history of their own sport. Because like I had talked about before, if they asked Dan Gable, Dan, where is our sport from? Your sport is called amateur catch as catch can. And Dan would have told them, your sport used to be one of the most deadly submission arts in the world until it had the submissions removed so it could go inside the modern day Olympics. And I believe the first or second Olympics, 1895-ish, 1900-ish, right around there. And a lot of wrestlers don't know that their art, what they call wrestling, actually used to be arguably the most deadly submission art in the world. And then you take those submissions out and you have the modern Olympic Games and they forget about the history of their own style.
It got homogenized. And the thing is that they lost a lot. And it was one of the reasons I wanted to bring it back. It was really, the whole show is fucking dedicated to Gene LaBelle. And I mean, there's no other way to look at it. You know, I mean, as a fighter, I wasn't heavy-handed, and I didn't. There's a couple of things you can't coach. You know, you can't coach a chin. I didn't have a great chin. I got knocked out a lot. But I had a world-class right leg, Bill Wallace said. But until I started training with Gene, like the 40-year-old me could beat the 22-year-old me anytime he wanted to. So the Contenders is an homage to LaBelle.
The Contenders reminds me of almost as if you have two sides of the same coin. And what I mean, the show was, as John billed it, wrestlers versus martial artists. And we now know, because of John, that when you put those two things together and make them into one, that they become greater than the sum of their parts.
Yeah, and you know, and I utilize wrestlers, you know, in all different ways in my training also. And as a fighter early on, you know, I never fought professionally against a wrestler because I would have got worked. I fought against the Russian judo champion and knocked him out, but he almost tore my fucking neck off in New York City. What I'm trying to say is that to become well-rounded, in my opinion, I had to do 10 years with LaBelle.
Yeah.
because what he's talking about is what I wanted to be. I wanted to be, the best fighter that I could be. As Frank Shamrock says, the best fighter in the world. He wanted to be. And so, I mean, I really relate to that. And whether someone's going to be disparaging of me or something, I'm 67 years old. The point, so I'm not coming out of retirement. But the point I'm trying to make is that you have to understand that it has to be a conglomeration of systems that makes the wholeness. And that's what Sam is saying, if I'm correct.
Absolutely. And Mark Schultz, one of the greatest wrestlers of our time, he says it like this. He says it, wrestling and jujitsu blended together are greater than the sum of its parts. So that's he's saying it. Yeah, he's saying it. Yeah, and the guy that's saying it now, the new expert, quote unquote, John Danaher, who John Perretti also knows. John Danaher says it like this: submission wrestling, John Show, is the future of the grappling arts. John's known that since for far longer than the public at large is just now starting to come around to this way of thinking. Because as we all know, right now in the United States, there is 10 to 20 pajama jiu-jitsu schools for every one MMA school. And that's no accident.
No, and I'll tell you, John Donahue, met him through Dr. Peter McGuire, who's completely forgotten who I am. I just listened to and he was one of the men at my wedding, and introduced me to my second wife, who I've known and trained, for forever. And he did an interview with that Navy SEAL, I can't remember his name, Jocko something. Yeah, just an incredible athlete and a man. I mean, I look like a woman standing next to him. But these people, they forget, but he introduced me to Donahue, and when he was at Columbia, and he that guy, he understands what he's saying. I think I tried to get him to compete once, but I think he was in school and he couldn't compete or something. I don't remember. There's a long list of people that I couldn't get on the show for different reasons. And on any of my shows or anybody's shows that I ran. It's interesting, the way people talk like they know, but very few understand, as you do, Sam. It's a point of contention, with me.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I have been, over the last several decades, I have been trying to collect as much information about the grappling arts as I could. And I noticed a common thought from the 90s was a lot of people in the 90s were trying to figure out which style of grappling was the best, when in reality, I always thought how to blend different styles in the best mixture, almost like making mixed drinks. And you've got an assortment of ingredients, but you've got to make a hell of a mixed drink. And you can't be it has to be selective. And, I don't want to bring up Bruce Lee much, but Bruce Lee used to talk about take what is useful, discard what is not, keep what is your own. And we need obvious statements like that to remind us how to think about martial arts sometimes. I know it seems obvious, fire test things in the forge, and if it doesn't work in your training with your partners, throw it out and try something else.
Yeah, but you know, sorry to step on your mythology, but you know, Gene, ran around with him, on the set, and wouldn't put him down. And you know, the guy died at like 127 pounds, over ODing on Epigesic and down. So the camera loved him. And in my youth, I imitated him a lot. In fact, that's how I got into Wing Chun, with Stephen Ang and Stephen Garrick and Lee Moshan in New York City. But he was too small and he couldn't tie his shoes.
Yeah, and I agree, John. I agree completely with you. Anytime I speak of Bruce, it's always I only talk about Bruce Lee, the philosopher, and never the fighter. As you guys know, he studied Western and Eastern philosophy, and I consider his work on philosophy far more important than him as a fighter, which I think is questionable.
And this. You got to understand, when Hollywood gets involved, there's a long list of people. I have great stories about a lot of fucking people, who are martial artists, who are like, rough and tumble. And they're not. But they're well known, and I know them. And, I'm open for debate with any of them. But as he said before, you don't know what's going to come out of my mouth, because I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth. If I get defensive, because I am a defensive fighter, then I might get a little agitated. But if you lie to me, like if you say something that's an abject lie, I'm going to react to it, because it's falsification of the truth, and I don't dig it.
I know about that from our conversations about Hicks and Gracie. But
Who'd he fight?
Our off the record conversation about Gracie.
Who'd he fight?
What I wanted to ask you about was the main event. You get these two guys to compete, Kenny Monday and Matt Hume. What did they, was there any apprehension from either one of them when you asked them to compete against each other?
Well, there's no apprehension from Kenny Monday for anybody, anywhere, anytime. He was going to train for that, and he was training, and he was, he was not ignorant. Matt Hume, there was, because Matt Hume's idol was Kenny Monday. So, it was kind of like Larry Holmes, having to beat up an old Muhammad Ali, not in a sense that either of these guys are has-beens, but Larry Holmes idolized Muhammad Ali. So it was very difficult. Now, Matt Hume is a very special guy, separate from what he said yesterday or whatever the fuck he talked to him, Sam. But Matt Hume's a very special guy. He's a very religious guy, who has a lot of heart, and is abjectly honest. So I think that Matt would never hold back in that situation, and that it was a chess match for Matt. And I think Kenny Monday was in fourth gear forward, and those guys were they were going at it. You watched it last night. What'd you think?
Did you see Kenny Monday try and footlock Matt Hume?
Yeah, I want to talk about this.
They trained. Kenny did his fucking homework. He did not come in there ignorant.
Yeah, Kenny goes for the ankle lock. Matt counters him, ends up tapping him really quick. Post match, was there any talk of, hey Kenny, why did you do this? Did Kenny kind of talk to you or anybody about what his thought
No,
process?
a
was?
lot of these wrestlers, you know, when they lose, they're in their own private Idaho.
There was no talk of it. Did he tell y'all I did this because of that, or there was none of that?
No, and you know, a lot of times, you know, like I remember Kevin Jackson going against Frank Shamrock, and I said, "Listen, Kevin, you've been boxing for a year. You could defend the tackle in your sleep. You know, just don't go in there and take him down." And that was what, 17 seconds or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, the last thing you want to do is be in the top position of the guard of Frank Shamrock.
Well, I think what John, you know, I would want to know if you agree with is Monday comes in fourth gear forward. You knew that that's the way it was going to be. And Frank also kind of knew what was coming. So once you know what was coming, it changes the aspect of a fight.
I don't think him
Yeah, but
expecting
wait,
Kenny Monday to
wait.
go for an ankle lock.
Yeah, no,
expected that.
Todd. Well, you know, you got to understand. There's an ego there that's you know that he can learn anything better than everybody else in a very short amount of time. But your analogy to Henderson and
Newton?
no, Henderson and in the Contenders,
Frank.
Frank is it doesn't hold up because the danger with the Greco-Roman guy is the clutch, and Henderson's clutch. That's why those guys actually learned to hit, because they could hold better than everybody else and hit. And so standing up, those guys were dead even because of Henderson's ability to control a body from the top was superior.
Okay.
And you know, it wasn't only Kenny Monday going for leg locks. Townsend Saunders dropped back a couple times in an attempt to ankle lock his opponent, and we were Townsend. Somebody
which
was
was
showing
brilliant.
Townsend, yeah, somebody
Do
told
what they
Townsend,
don't know.
Yes, somebody told Townsend, "Hey, he's a jiu-jitsu guy you're going to be facing," and most jiu-jitsu men traditionally are not familiar with ankle cranking and leg locks.
Until the Machados put out a book called The Secret Leg Locks of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which was exactly what Gene had been teaching them for the last 10 years.
Right. That's right.
Give me a fucking break.
But Townsend kind of did that to counter the knee bar that Nurse had gone for. You know, I think he had kind of done that to escape it.
But you got to do your homework.
Right.
Townsend was training.
You can't just pull that out of your ass.
Right.
You got to do your fucking homework.
Yeah. Kenny's was more of an offensive move.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Somebody was training Townsend, and I don't know who it was, but I think it was some leg locker in Los Angeles, but I could be wrong.
I thought most people expected Kenny to do like what Van Arsdale did. I'm going to do my game and your game won't work. I'll just totally physically dominate you, and you won't be able to do anything that you want to do to me.
No, that's Van Arsdale.
Yeah. I think that's what people expected Monday to do. That's what the announcers even said. Monday's going to go in there. He's going to control. He's going to get his points, and it'll be a walk in the park. That's what they expected.
John once said, it's as if the wrestlers had been living on a deserted island where they had never been exposed to anything submission related, or they were never told through all their life of wrestling, hey, did you know your art used to be the greatest submission art at one time before it had its testicles removed?
Yeah, I know, but you're breaking a dead horse right there. So you're not subtle.
Right.
Anyway, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure, but
Yeah.
I got a big day tomorrow.
I'd love
No.
to come back and talk with you about some of these stories that you were.
I have
sometimes,
such great
you know,
I have such great stories.
get more
They're-
into the John Perretti journey. You know,
there's so much stuff that we could talk about.
Todd, have you read John's book already?
well, Miguel has.
Okay.
Miguel
I
has it
highly
on him right
recommend
now.
it.
Miguel has it in his
Mhm.
possession.
Yes.
Yeah, I
In
live
his
in Costa
clutches.
Rica now, and I had it delivered to me down here.
Yeah, if you can
Back
show
in the old days.
can you show the book so people can
Yeah,
see
hold it up.
what
Miguel has it in his clutches. You see
the
it?
origin of a species?
Yeah. And I would venture to say that that species is definitely one of a kind, John.
Yes.
Thank you, man. Thank you for
Yeah.
everything, man.
And please let them know where it can be found, where they can purchase a copy.
I will. I'll go ahead and I don't know how we're going to do this. I can edit a little bit. I maybe can help Todd and get the picture of this put over us instead of me holding it up, and a couple little things like that, as well as a link. So
Thank
for
you.
sure, for sure.
Well, I've been
I
putting
know-
it in the show notes of the videos that I've been doing with him.
I'll tell you, this is one of those things that you got to appreciate it. It's a labor of love. This man
He
put a lot of
didn't
love
just
into this
get
book.
that either, because when I told Miguel I'm gonna be talking to John, he immediately put up a picture of the book, and I'm like, "You mean you already have this thing?"
Yeah, no, I actually
You already
talked to
had it.
John. I talked to John on Facebook. He's off Facebook now, if I'm not mistaken, but he spent a little bit of time on Facebook around the
Yeah.
time this was published, and we were trying to line up the interview, and I didn't have it yet. I was having it mailed, and then at some point he came off Facebook, and it never materialized. And I'm
Well,
grateful to Todd and grateful to John and Sam for giving me a chance to right that wrong, because interviewing John Perretti is the stuff that needs to happen more in MMA, not
It was
less.
like Miguel had ESP because John had just told me, "Have you read my memoirs?" And Miguel just put up a picture of his memoirs like 5 minutes after John asked me that, and I'm like,
but
What the hell?
Todd, that doesn't let you off the hook.
"I know, you're right about that."
Yeah, and guys,
I
I
have to
really
get it.
appreciate you guys bringing me on here as well. I thank you very much, and I hope we get to do this again sometime.
No,
Oh, no
Sam,
doubt.
honestly, I'll tell you, this wouldn't have been as good without you. So thank you very much for your
No doubt.
contributions as well,
Yeah,
for sure.
thank you for all the support. I really appreciate it.
John, you know I care about you, man, and I'll back you up whenever I can.
I know that. I know that. Someday we'll talk about the Basques.
I would like that.
I appreciate it,
And
John.
and my novel's coming out. So and there's a lot of Basque in it.
Okay.
Awesome. That is
All right,
awesome.
gentlemen.
And oh, I want to add, I did make it into John's book, and very briefly, John put me in there, and I do briefly mention the Contenders, but I can't remember the page number. And thank you again, guys.
All right, take it easy, John. A pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, and
Bye-bye,
everybody
thank
check
you.
this out. I
Bye, guys.
appreciate it. Until next time, take care.